Peter B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Tuesday, August 15th, 2017. Just a quick update for you. I'll be leaving on vacation Thursday morning, so tomorrow I'll have a news and comment podcast for you, and if everything goes as scheduled, another in-depth interview podcast before I go. Alarming news surfaced yesterday that affects me directly. We learned that the Department of Justice in July issued a massive sweeping search warrant to a web hosting company in Southern California called DreamHost. The demand from the Justice Department, with air quotes around it, is for the IP addresses of 1.3 million people who visited a website called disruptj20.org. This was in advance of the Trump inauguration, and apparently 1.3 million people browsed in there. The warrant demands their IP addresses and the date and time of their visit, and information about what browser or operating system they used. Now, you would think, with a demand for 1.3 million accounts, that, gosh, this must be a national security case of huge implications. No. This is a punitive effort to punish people drastically who participated in protests at the Trump inaugural, which had, of course, the largest crowds in world history last January 20th. And the website, disruptj20.org, was used to coordinate protests and civil disobedience. Now, we can deduct that most of these 1.3 million people did not go to Washington, because despite the massive crowds, largest ever, many people didn't bother to attend the ceremonies in Washington. Many of them were probably just curious and figuring out, well, what could I do in my hometown to express my rejection of this man being inaugurated? Now, DreamHost is the company that hosts the podcasts of peterbcollins.com. I just mailed them my annual check on Friday. DreamHost does a great job. They do a good job with the audio files and the other intricacies of the Peter B. Collins operation. And I am very pleased that they are fighting to protect the identities of 1.3 million people who clicked on one of the websites that they host. They have teamed up with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which has characterized the warrant as unconstitutional and a fishing expedition. Now, let me be clear. There is no information that I have that my personal website has been targeted. There have been no warrants delivered to identify the people who use the peterbcollins.com website. But when you hear people say, I don't worry about government surveillance, I've got nothing to hide. But even if you think you have nothing to hide, a simple visit to a website that is now targeted by the Department of Justice could put you in their sights. And they could manufacture information to make you look guilty if they, whoever they happen to be, wanted to do that. And so I will continue to support DreamHost in this fight against the government, and I hope you will express similar sentiments. And let me take a minute here to explain how the government does frame people, using their own words against them, from secret recordings, the insertion of an undercover operative. And yesterday we reported on the case of Jerry Varnell, the 23-year-old man from Oklahoma City who we were told by the FBI was trying to blow up a local bank in the style of Tim McVeigh, using fertilizer and diesel packed into a truck. And in the show file for today's podcast, I have linked to two very different stories about the same situation, about the same case. The first is from BuzzFeed. And as you know, I've been paying more attention to BuzzFeed because my friend and colleague Jason Leopold has gone to work there in their investigative unit. But I have to say I have very mixed reviews of BuzzFeed. And in today's example, I see a case of stenography, where they just took the information that the FBI gave them and they wrote a story about it. The case dates back to December 21st, when a confidential source informed the FBI that Varnell was allegedly interested in bombing the Federal Reserve Building in Washington, D.C., in a manner similar to the '95 attack on the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. The confidential source, who the FBI said was serving a prison sentence at the time, started a dialogue with Varnell through encrypted chat applications and Facebook Messenger. They've got quotes. This is the kind of information that they can dig up when you think you've got nothing to hide. So we have the FBI quoting Varnell telling the confidential source, "I'm out for blood. When militias start getting formed, I'm going after government officials when I have a team. I think I'm going to go with what the OKC bomber used, diesel and anhydrous ammonia." On June 1st of this year, the confidential source arranged for Varnell to meet with an undercover FBI agent known only as the Professor, who said they could obtain the explosives and help construct a bomb. At that point, Varnell expressed 3%er ideology, a reference to the heavily armed militia group. And BuzzFeed is even kind enough to give the FBI this caveat. According to court documents, the FBI agent, per sting operation protocol, gave Varnell several opportunities to back out of the operation, but each time he expressed a desire to move forward. They talk about how Varnell, on the night of the crime last Friday night, Saturday morning, attempted to detonate the bomb by dialing a number on the FBI agent's burner phone, which actually rang a phone belonging to the FBI. So they've got him framed here from beginning to end. And BuzzFeed doesn't bother to tell you, or they didn't bother to dig deep enough to find out, what the Daily Beast reports. And that is that Jerry Varnell is a deeply mentally ill individual. He's diagnosed as schizophrenic. Varnell's mother told the Daily Beast that this is the latest symptom of her son's schizophrenia. He has been hospitalized 6 times since the age of 16. He's only 23. And he was married and divorced in the last few years. Mom, Melanie Varnell, said he's okay when and if he takes his medication. Without the Haldol, she said, he thinks he's Jesus. He's tried to make gold before. He's chased trolls. He's very mentally ill. I consider this entrapment. They got him to do this. We live 2 hours from Oklahoma City, where the alleged target was. He has no job. He has no money. He has no vehicle. He has no driver's license. So all of this had to be enabled by the FBI. And this is not the first time they've done it. If you're a regular listener, you've heard me interview Trevor Aronson. You've heard me talk about almost 600 cases now of frame-ups of so-called domestic terrorism suspects. Mom also added he has all kinds of conspiracy theories in his brain. He's tried to bring up Anonymous. He's tried to bring stuff up to us. We do nothing to encourage his theories. Varnell's ex-wife told police he had a schizophrenic episode in 2013 during an arrest for domestic violence. And court documents show that he has been diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, a combination of schizophrenia and mood disorders. The ex-wife told police that Varnell said he would die at midnight and therefore needed to impregnate her. She was raped, he told police, and then she called police to stop him from hurting her. She didn't want to press charges. They were divorced last year. And get this, when the FBI raided the parents' home last Saturday morning at 6 a.m., they broke 2 security cameras and took the family's DVR. We've done everything possible to keep him at home, to be able to function a little bit in society, and now our whole family is going to be destroyed because of the good old FBI. I don't know what to do. And just one more item here, gilding the lily. The Justice Department press release said that this was a domestic terrorism investigation, but no terrorism charges have been filed. He's facing 1 count of malicious intended destruction of a building. This is where we are in America today. This is why I was screaming over the last few weeks about the rubber-stamped confirmation of Chris Wray as the new FBI director. Not a single senator asked a question about these sting operations under the guise of domestic terrorism. And this is the society we live in today. Well, Kim Jong Un has blinked a little bit. North Korea said that it's going to pause its threat to launch ballistic missiles aimed at Guam as it waits to assess the foolish and stupid conduct of the United States. Now, this is an interesting break in the tensions, the escalating tensions that Trump has fed with his threats via Twitter and the media in the past week. And I expect that Trump will take credit for this. Say, see, I told that little punk that we would blast him off the face of the earth, and so he eased up on his threat. That's what I expect Trump to say. But in an in-depth interview that I'm releasing to subscribers today at peterbcollins.com, international independent journalist Pepe Escobar confirms one of my notions, which I mentioned yesterday and on Friday, and that is that it's China and Xi Jinping who have put the chokers on Trump and on Kim. Here's an excerpt from that interesting conversation with Pepe Escobar.
They play Go, Peter. And it's very easy to surround an adversary who's shooting all over the place like Trump. Very, very easy. They took their time for a response. They didn't issue an official response. It's a signed piece in the Global Times, which you can read as the consensus. It's not directly from the leadership, but it's authorized by the leadership, and it reflects a certain consensus. It may not be all the members of the Politburo following this direction, but most of them. And this is a checkmate, because they knew that the rhetoric was going nowhere, or worse than that, was becoming literally nuclear. Mm-hmm. They knew that Trump needed something to deviate attention from Russiagate, even though Russiagate has been totally debunked by so many important sources, from Bill Binney to Ray McGovern, everybody. So this story is not flying in the U.S. anymore, and U.S. public opinion is not interested in Russiagate anymore. People have been saturated by it for months. So, but at the same time, we have what Robert Mueller is cooking. And this, I would say the Trump brand is very worried about it. According to some echoes that I got from friends in New York that are more or less, let's say, discreet supporters of President Trump. So, so the best diversionist tactic is North Korea. The problem is you're not dealing directly with North Korea. You are dealing indirectly with China. But from the Chinese point of view, you're dealing directly with Beijing. Because anything that happens in the Korean Peninsula, it's right across Chinese borders. So you can imagine people who live in Donggang across the Yalu River. On the other side of Yalu River is North Korea. And it's 2.5 train ride from Pyongyang to the Chinese border. I took this trip 7 years ago when I went to North Korea. So obviously, the Chinese Communist Party said, no, this thing has to be at least neutralized as it stands. And this piece in the Global Times, in my opinion, did it. There's no question about it.
I invite you to listen to the full interview with Pepe Escobar. It runs about an hour, and we cover the Trump and North Korea showdown. We talk about his threats against Venezuela, Iran, the secret plan to end the war in Syria, the Trump-Russia scandal, and much more. I always enjoy talking to Pepe, and he has quite a bit to say. So I hope you will check out the full interview when you have a chance. And I always like to take a moment to thank the people who support my work with your subscriptions to the Peter B. Collins podcast. And what I do is I print out lists from PayPal of people who've recently paid up or paid in. And today, Faith Peoples shows up with her monthly payment of $20 and her annual payment of $50. I thought she had consolidated some of those subscriptions. She also has generously kicked in $50 for the fund to buy a new mixer board here at the Secret Studio. So, Faith, I really appreciate your support deeply, I would say. Sandra Fish kicks in $5 a month, and so does Jason Spitzer. Thanks to each of you. And I'd like to be mentioning your name once in a while here. All you got to do is come over to peterbcollins.com, click on the menu tab wherever you find it in your browser, pull it down, click on Become a Subscriber. That takes you to the sign-up page, and boom, you can make a choice. I hope you will. So, a few other things that I talked to Pepe Escobar about include the unexpected threat from Trump about a military option for Venezuela. And Escobar and I agreed that this simply strengthens the position of Nicolas Maduro. And this is Trump at his finest, such as it is. New York Times said in a headline today, Trump's threat against Maduro unites Latin America, against U.S. And this is being played out in other parts of the world as well, because the Iranians are really talking tougher. Rouhani today said that if Trump insists on pulling out of the nuclear agreement, the international nuclear agreement, that Iran could start enriching uranium at 20% weapons grade within a day. And this shows that while Trump's tough talk impresses Trump, it doesn't impress the people he's talking at, the people he is attacking, the countries he is undermining and turning into adversaries or enemies unnecessarily. It's really stunning. And the insensitive, arrogant guy with little self-control, Trump today, really made a mistake on Twitter, as if he hasn't done this before. But he did delete, after he posted on Twitter, a cartoon of a train running over a human who is replaced by the CNN logo. And we'll get into the details in a second here about why he's attacking CNN. But this guy has no concept of how people react to this. And that just a few days after Heather Heyer was mowed down by a car in Charlottesville, Virginia, he would wish that CNN gets mowed down by a train. I mean, his sense of optics, his sense of human responses is really twisted. And so you'll probably see this online somewhere. But, you know, it's just one of those silly little infographics that people put together in social media. But when you think about how Trump has sanctioned violence, the weasel words he offered under duress yesterday are absolutely meaningless. We know that he stokes violent actions by his supporters, and he condones them. He sends the dog whistle messages that it's okay. So this Twitter attack on CNN is part of an ongoing effort to demonize the news network as a fake news outlet and an enemy, a personal enemy of Donald Trump. And the Trump campaign, which is an entity set up for 2020, is trying to buy time on CNN to run a highly misleading commercial. Now, CNN so far has rejected the ad because it includes images of its reporters and anchors. And a network spokesperson said that they would accept the ad if those images are removed because they think that it's unfair to characterize them as enemies of the president. But I think that the whole spot is filled with misleading statements and outright lies. It's 30 seconds long. Let's take a listen.
Democrats obstructing, the media attacking our president, career politicians standing in the way of success. But President Trump's plan is working. 1 million jobs created.
That's not
More
true.
Americans working than ever before.
That's true.
Unemployment lowest since 2001.
That's
the
true.
Stock market, all-time record highs. The strongest military in decades.
That's
the
bullshit.
president's enemies don't want him to succeed. But Americans are saying, let President Trump do his job.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
So that is the spot. And you can understand that CNN would not want to foster an attack on itself, even if it's paid for by the president's campaign. But beyond that, the claims are a stretch to begin with. That idea that the military is stronger because of him, nothing's really changed. And the job claims that he makes are really due to the pain and suffering that Barack Obama endured for 8 years trying to recover from the damage done by Republicans. Another item that we mentioned in the in-depth interview with Pepe Escobar relates to the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, who has confided in people like Martin Indyk, a former American ambassador, and Stephen Hadley, who was a national security advisor to George W. Bush, that he wants out of Yemen. Now, this has been his baby, and it's actually good news to see that he appears to be recognizing that just killing people doesn't resolve the political issues, and hopefully they will stand down in Yemen. We have another leak-based report in the Washington Post about Trump-Russia. This one comes with a very misleading headline. Trump campaign emails show aides' repeated efforts to set up Russia meetings. Because when you read the full article, what you discover is that this low-level staffer named George Papadopoulos tried about a half dozen times to persuade senior leadership, including Paul Manafort, that he could arrange meetings with the Russian leadership, quote, including Putin. Now, these meetings were rejected. Just the idea was rejected. A campaign co-chair, Sam Clovis, said he thought that NATO allies should be consulted before any plans like that. Another advisor, Navy Rear Admiral Charles Kubik, cited legal concerns, including a violation of U.S. sanctions with Russia. So what the story actually says is that you got this one eager beaver who's saying, hey, the Russians want to help us, let's talk to the Russians. Even Paul Manafort rejected in May 2016 a proposal from Papadopoulos for Trump to take a meeting with Russian representatives. So what's fascinating to me is that when they detail where the leak came from, these exchanges are among more than 20,000 pages of documents the Trump campaign turned over to congressional committees this month. But they don't even actually have copies of the emails. A selection of Papadopoulos' emails were read to the Post by a person with access to them. Now, this is not journalism. This is hearsay. And it's hearsay that doesn't even promote the narrative, the false meme that the Post and the Times and MSNBC have been promoting for almost a year now. And in an honest moment, a separate column at the Post, the Fix column, acknowledges that there is good news for Trump in this report. But somebody who just breezed by the headline or saw it posted on Facebook would not get that idea at all. The Congressional Budget Office has done an analysis and said that if the Trump administration carries out its threat to end subsidies paid to insurance companies for the benefit of low-income people, that just directly related to that, the premiums would shoot up at least 20%, and the federal budget deficit would increase by $194 billion over the next 10 years, where the subsidies, if they were rolled out over the next 10 years, would cost only about $10 billion a year. We'll see if anybody's paying attention to those numbers at the White House. I tend to doubt it. Now, to the fallout from the events in Charlottesville last weekend. I am really troubled that people I know and respect who are progressives, they are not moderates, they're progressive leftist Democrats, are posting items on Facebook basically saying that Nazis are fair game. And my friend Matt put up a post last night about punching a Nazi. And I gently riposted, based on my Facebook friends, I'm seeing a rash of progressive vigilantes offer harsh judgments of Nazis while approving violent reprisals. I'm sympathetic to the thought, but not the expression. And Matt responded that Cornel West thanked Nazi punchers this morning because they saved his life on Saturday. Not punching Nazis isn't working. If that makes me something other than the amorphous progressive, so be it. I see who we're dealing with very clearly. Now, what I don't see here is a distinction between self-defense and hostile types of aggression. Because if Cornel West said this because he was in Charlottesville on Saturday and some people protected him, that is very different. That is self-defense. And if it is unprovoked, you're attacked by anyone, Nazi or anyone else, you have the right to defend yourself. But the idea that we're going to promote aggression toward people who we think are Nazis, who's going to decide who's a Nazi and who deserves a punch? This is a very dangerous cycle of ideas. And one woman who responded to this thread, apparently responding to me, said, I can't wait for all of you people to tell me what I'm supposed to do when Nazis march through my town and beat me with sticks. Lie there and take it, I suppose. I mean, this is projection of the lowest form. There were roughly 300 to 500 so-called white nationalists, and a handful of those people identified as Nazis. But the perception appears to be that there's a Nazi on every corner with a stick ready to come down and beat you. This is hysteria, and it will serve no one well. In Durham, North Carolina last night, there was an anti-racism rally, and people did a Saddam Hussein statue toppling. They pulled down a 100-year-old statue of a Confederate soldier. Now, I saw it on television. My first comment is, boy, that wasn't anchored very well. They basically just tilted it, and it toppled. It's also worth noting that many of the statues in the South were erected by the Daughters of the Confederacy in the early 1900s, well after the Civil War, and that this was part of racist iconography. But I agree with the Democratic governor of North Carolina, Roy Cooper. He tweeted, the racism and deadly violence in Charlottesville is unacceptable, but there is a better way to remove these monuments. And there's actually a law in North Carolina that says, you got to have state permission to take them down. And I do think that it's worth a national conversation to decide what relics, what historical icons, what statues should be kept, and those which should be either destroyed or placed in a museum. But the idea that we're going to have our history scrubbed by angry mobs, even those that are righteous in their motivation, no, I'm not down with that, I'll tell you. Then we have the doxers, the people who looked at pictures of the Charlottesville protests on Friday night and Saturday and thought they identified people, and then they outed them. Well, there was a big blunder, because a guy named Kyle Quinn, who is an assistant professor at the University of Arkansas, was not in Charlottesville, but somebody who looked like him and who was sporting an Arkansas engineering T-shirt. Well, Kyle Quinn was misidentified as that person. He's got an alibi. He was out to dinner with a friend and his wife on Friday night in Arkansas. And so Kyle Quinn deserves an apology from these online vigilantes who are out there trying to use public shame to punish people for their expression. And I don't agree with what they expressed, but I do uphold their right to express it. There's an interesting piece in the New York Times today written by a Jeremy Peters, I don't know, And he tries to thoughtfully explain the right-wing view that there's a lot of left-wing violence that goes unreported by the media and unaddressed by law enforcement. But the citations of violence on the left include Kathy Griffin's posing with a fake severed head of Trump. That's not real. Or the production of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar in New York with a Trump look-alike who is fatally stabbed on stage. That's not real. There is the one case of the Sanders supporter who got his gun and shot Steve Scalise and the other GOP softball players. But when you look at the actual statistics of 372 murders committed by domestic extremists between 07 and 16, 74% committed by right-wing extremists, 24% by people tagged as Muslim extremists. Do you know what that leaves? You don't even need a calculator. 2% of these cases come from the left. But facts don't really matter. Let me offer a little fact that there were some people in Charlottesville who are conservatives, who are self-styled members of militias, who they said were, they were there to keep the peace. That's not how I would do it. But they went to some lengths to separate themselves from the white supremacists, the Klan, and the neo-Nazis. And I think it's fair to note that. Steve Bannon, Sebastian Gorka, and Christopher Miller are now targeted, and there's a lot of media chatter about trying to get Trump to tell them, you're fired. Now, Bannon seems to be on the ropes, not only for his history of supporting white nationalists, but because of his lame advice to the president. Maybe that's not fair. The president might value it more than I do. But it does appear that he is ready to leave. He's been telling people that he never expected to last longer than 8 months, and gosh, I think we've hit that point. We'll see if Trump actually lowers the boom on any of these clowns. And finally yesterday, I called out CEOs in general. After the CEO of Merck, Ken Fraser, resigned in protest from a presidential appointment. And I want to acknowledge that Scott Paul, president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, Kevin Plank, the founder of Under Armour, I'm wearing a pair of your shoes, and the CEO of Intel, Brian Krzanich, have also resigned from presidential appointments. I'm glad to see that. Thanks for joining me today for my News and Comment podcast. It's available free, and it's available on YouTube. I'm Peter B.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.